Yes, sir. I went and started an Age of Sigmar army, and I landed on the Jaws of Mork, a Gloomspite Gitz army, like goblins riding squigs. And you know, I didn't really know which army to go with. There were so many awesome-looking miniatures that I just couldn't make up my mind. But knowing after playing Warhammer 40k for years and years, I've kind of fallen to a lot of pitfalls when it comes to choosing my army. I first started my Necron army based mostly on how much I loved their lore, and when it came time to actually play the game, I found their slowness and their durability to be neat but very slow paced, and I felt kind of restrained by it. And the next army I started was a Nurgle army, Nurgle demons and Death Guard Space Marines, and I kind of fell into that same pit. Again, they're very durable and very slow, so it felt like I didn't feel as much as in control of the board as I would like to, and both of those times I love the way the models look, I love the way their lore is written and everything about that, but when it came time to actually play the tabletop, I was left kinda dissatisfied. So when I knew I wanted to start a fantasy army, I started to look around for mobility. Like which armies are really good at just moving from one table edge to the other, and it doesn't matter really what all those other features would be. I'm pretty sure that most of the armies had beautiful enough models and sculpts and lore that I would just fall in love with them regardless. So I made the tabletop my top priority, and I approached one of my favorite YouTubers about whose channel is about Age of Sigmar, called HeyWow, and I sent him a comment about the subject, and he listed a bunch of armies that are based off of that. Like it came down to basically either the Jaws of Mork or the Idoneth Deepkin, and at that time when I made my choice, it was like Idoneth Deepkin had very like kind of rules where a lot of people were abusing their rules to where like they would spam certain units to where it like felt, you know, unsportsmanlike, and the Jaws of Mork were kind of new. They were like they had just gotten their own specific rules in the White Dwarf magazine, and they were an army that not too many people play. I mean, there's of course a lot of people playing all the armies, but still it felt like maybe some kind of an underdog or something like that, and that kind of lit a fire under my butt. And also it was like a lot of the armies I've collected before were very serious, very grim dark, very like no nonsense, and with these guys there's a lot of nonsense that I love. So yeah, I started with getting this bunch. It's just some squig hoppers, and one of my favorite things to point out, or favorite things, one of the things I feel is a good thing to point out to a lot of people who are painting miniatures is to really emphasize on sub-assemblies. That's one of those things where people don't often talk about it, where if you look at painting tutorials online, a lot of them, they build the miniature all the way to its final form and then start painting it. And that's usually horrible advice to give somebody, but it makes for a better looking video where you can see the fully assembled unpainted model, and at the end of the video you can see the fully assembled painted miniature, so you can see like the before and after very well. But with most miniatures there's a lot of crevices and there's a lot of places that are very hard to reach once you're dedicated to painting a fully assembled miniature. Even with this guy, with his with the rider and with the face, there aren't too many places that you couldn't reach, but the biggest one is the squig's mouth and the inside of his mouth. So yeah, painting them in sub-assemblies is, in my opinion, almost essential. So yeah, let's go into the actual painting. I base painted the entire miniature with Xandri Dust spray, and this was a good base coat for the upcoming browns on the squig, but in the end it's not that important what the paint is, as long as it helps the actual paint you're going to be painting on it attach better and not like scrape off easily. You know, that's the main point of doing a primer spray. And I started with the goblin and its cloak. I wanted to have that kind of a night goblin feel for his cloak, but I wanted to do something not something kind of tricky and something I hadn't tried before, and that was to base coat the cloak with Celestra Gray, and then give it a coat of Nighthaunt Gloom, a paint I had never used before, and then go in with Incubi Darkness to basically give all the places where there's larger canvases of that cloak a kind of a smoother texture and smoother paint job, to where the kind of Nighthaunt Gloom on top of Celestial Grey is more at the edges of the cloak, where it's gone through much more wear and tear and kind of felt the ravages of time with an old cloak. It's not straight out of the factory line. And then I went to the skin, and I saw this tip for this kind of skin that somebody had done on their ogres, and I really liked it. I went in with Iron Rack skin, and then I highlighted it with Deepkin flesh. And then I glazed over it with Athonian camo shade, and I went back with Deepkin flesh a little bit for the very tips of the nose and chin and these kinds of things. And I really like this kind of pale green, this kind of like, it reminds me of the ogre snotlings, like when you look at the artwork for them, and this really felt that kind of a green, and it really, I really like it. And then I went to the armor bits, and I knew I wanted the armor to be all rusted out. I took a lot of hints from the Nighthaunt armies, where there's a lot of like dark cloaks, rusty weapons, and bones. And the bone comes in with the kind of a skin tone of the squig itself. But the armor bits for the goblin, I started with Leadbelcher. And once I had a smooth coat of that, I went in with a glaze of Agrax Earthshade, just in case. It's gonna be covered with other paints, but still I felt like if there's any point where it, the undercoating kind of peeks out from underneath those upcoming effect paints, that it would be still brown. And then I went in with Typhus Corrosion, and I feel that Typhus Corrosion is like the reigning champion of doing realistic rust. Like, there's a lot of different effects that people do that I'm never convinced by. A lot of them have to do with rust, a lot of them have to do with oxidized metal, and things like that, where a lot of people follow tutorials that just say that, okay, this is what oxidized metal is supposed to be painted like. But when you look at pictures of actually oxidized statues and things like that, it kind of looks different than what usually painting tutorials guide you to do. And oftentimes when I've seen like historical miniatures being painted, and then people use all sorts of powders and different kinds of effects like that for rust, I think they can't hold a candle to Typhus Corrosion. And there's also all sorts of snow effects, which I feel like the Citadel texture paints do a better job than a lot of like these old school baking soda, or what was it, like that people use all sorts of things. But anyway, now that tirade is done, after the Typhus Corrosion has covered basically all of the metal surfaces, I put it on pretty liberally, but then at the same time I don't want it to obfuscate any of the three-dimensional things having to do with the sculpt, but it doesn't matter if the brown tint of it completely covers all of that Agrax Earthshade covered Leadbelcher color beneath. And then I dry brush it very, very lightly with Ryza Rust. And I do it very lightly because usually when I see rust, it's kind of like that, where the brown is the dominant color. It's not like bright orange usually. Of course, there's examples of that as well, I'm sure, but still, it's like when I think of completely rusted barrels, completely rusted like ramps, metal ramps, or tools or something, it's pretty much brown. And then go in and do very light edge highlighting with Stormhost Silver. Basically, like if you're using these weapons and you bang them on stuff, if you scrape them on stuff, the rust is gonna peel off, and underneath you can see like the actual metal of it. So that's and it also kind of brings back the shape and kind of expresses the three-dimensional aspect of the sculpt as well. And yeah, then I go and basically do all the ropes, and I also do the teeth with Storm Vermin Fur and Ushapti Bone. So basically those colors are for the ropes and the teeth. Then I go to the actual squig, and I started by addressing the base itself. I wanted there to be texture before I started any of the coloring. I put the texture in before I did the spray on the model. And I used Astro Granite Debris, and I put some skulls there, actually one skull, and then I put some stones there as well. And with all those together and having them sprayed, they're gonna make the base look all nice and dandy. And yeah, with the squig, I started by covering the skin with Ushapti Bone. That gave it like that's the basic first layer of paint on the squig, and I washed all over it with Agrax Earthshade, and then dry brushed on top of that with Screaming Skull. This is exactly how I do bones, basically. So I took the idea of the Nighthaunt miniatures of having certain colors next to certain other colors, and I decided on the Cloak of the Goblin coming in next to this sort of bone color. And then I went to the gums and the inside of his mouth, and I painted that with Screamer Pink, and I edge highlighted certain parts with Pink Horror, and then I washed all over them with Caribou Crimson. And I went in with the teeth next. I painted them with Screaming Skull, and I highlighted them with White Scar to make very like super bright white teeth, but then I washed them with Seraphim Sepia. In that way I got the teeth to look really like the sickly yellowish brown that's different from the skin tone, because usually teeth are done the same way you do bones, but when the skin is like bone, you know, I wanted to do something that made it stand out, and that made it look very much like if your dog or something has like problems with their teeth or something like that. Usually they have this yellowish tint, and I wanted to get that. Then I went for its claws, and I painted its claws with Storm Vermin Fur, and I highlighted them very mild little stripes of Dawnstone and washed over them with Agrax Earthshade. And then next comes in something I wanted to give to them as kind of a army-wide gimmick, which is face paint. And I'm a big pro wrestling fan, so immediately my imagination started to flare up of how could I use this idea in future projects on some like leader models or something like that. And yeah, it made them kind of stand out, especially with such a pale skin, because usually squigs have such bright like vibrant colored skin, that now that I went for something so like beige and kind of a pale and neutral color. I wanted something to make it stand out. So the face paint, I made it freehand with Screamer Pink and highlighted those Screamer Pink areas with Pink Horror. And then I went in with the black areas with Abaddon Black and highlighted them with Eshin Gray and then washed over it with Nuln Oil. Now the Nuln Oil, I feel like that was maybe a mistake because it made the crimson parts look pretty dark. I should have maybe gone in with Carabao Crimson instead, but well, now that it's this way, I'll leave it this way, and I'll keep that in mind when it comes time to paint the rest of the box. And yeah, then I went in for the eye, and I painted the eye with Ulthuan Gray, and then I used white scar on the very tip of it, and then I glazed it with a mix of Carabao Crimson and Lamian Medium, and I really used a lot of the Lamian Medium because the Crimson color is like all red paints. It has a very strong pigment, so it needs a lot of medium to kind of not make it so domineering over a white surface. So I can't remember, it was maybe something like 6 brushfuls of the medium and only 1 brushful of Carabao Crimson, and I ran it into the crevices, the edges of the eye. And this guy has the biggest eye of all of the squigs in this box, so it kind of stands out more that this is left as a blind white eye. But when it comes time to make the other squigs that have like spider-like eyes or only 2 beady eyes, they're so small that I'm gonna make them all just white. Maybe this guy's white eye just stands out a bit more because of its size, but you know, what can you do? I didn't want him to stand out as the one squig who has actual like a pupil in the center of his eye. And then I went to the base. Here's a little edit. I, for some reason, completely forgot to mention the smoke coming from the mushrooms that the squig is riding on. And I painted them with Ulthuan Gray, the smoke, and I highlighted the smoke with white scar to create that kind of a white base, again with highlights and a little bit of a grayish inner sections in the crevices, and then I glazed over that with Waywatcher Green glaze. And Waywatcher Green, sadly, is one of those discontinued paints from the Citadel Glaze paint line. I still have a lot of those paints around and I enjoy using them, but I'm sure there's some sort of an equivalent in the contrast paint line that is available today. Just remember to really lighten them up with the contrast medium before using them as a straight-on glaze, because they're a lot sturdier in the pigment department. But I've been told that they, when used with medium, they work exactly like the old glazes, or at least very much like them. I base coated the entire base with Death Guard Green. Then I put Rakarth Flesh for the mushrooms. I put Ushabti Bone for the skull. Dawnstone for the stones. And then I dry brushed Nurgling Green on just about everything before washing all over everything with Athonian Camo Shade. And then I did the rim of the base with Storm Vermin Fur. Now, at that point, the model was almost complete, basically, and I also sprayed him with a varnish spray. I used the Munitorum varnish from Citadel, and I've always liked that product. And after that, I went to the base again, and I added some tufts, some grass, and other greenery with PVA glue. And then I went in with Ard Coat, which is like a glossy varnish, and I varnished the eye and the mouth to make them kind of glisten and be all gross and everything. And the very last thing I did, this is the first time I've ever tried this, but I've seen so many painting tutorials online where people have tried it. I've always found it cool, but it's always been kind of intimidating because I've always had 100 scenarios in my head about how this could go wrong. And basically by trial and error, I learned to do it. And that's using Uhu glue. I don't know what it is about Uhu glue, why it's the glue that everyone recommends, but it's the glue that behaves this way. And I used a toothpick to take some Uhu glue, and I created some strings of drool between the squig's upper and lower jaw and between its teeth to make it really look, you know, lively, make the drool effect come to life, because there's a lot of squig models that have like a lot of drool on them. And I contemplated with the idea of making these squigs like super dark by having their mouths be full of blood and gore, and make red strains of Uhu glue by mixing in like red and black into the glue before applying it. But then I came up with the face paint idea, and I didn't want to put a hat on a hat, as they say. So basically I decided on one of those ideas, and I didn't want to make this army a kind of a grim, dark, super serious man by doing the whole gore idea. So I went with the face paint and the drool, and I'm really glad with the result. So yeah, this is pretty much what it looks like when it's finished, and I'm happy with it. I'm happy to paint an entire model this way, entire army this way, and having painted my very first fantasy model, you know, everything considered, it's back out! It's the Mangle Squig King! Back out!